Well, good morning, everybody. For them as don't know who I am, if you haven't been here before, I'm John Judge, and I'm pretty much the executive director and chief bottle washer of COPA, Coalition of Political Assassinations. And this is our, what would it be, our 12th annual conference, I think, here in Dallas, a regional meeting. So we've got speakers this morning till noon, and then we'll come back at 2 and have more. The speakers this morning are focused on archiving of materials and what's being found in those archives and the newly released files. So it's a combination of both. And unfortunately, one group of speakers that was going to send someone today to speak didn't, and that was I had asked someone from the Malcolm X Museum. The Audubon is going to become a museum where Malcolm was shot to his life and death, and I was hoping one of their archivists could come, but no one ever got back to me. So, but we do have several speakers who are working on current archives to talk to us about what they're finding there. And the first is Ben Rogers, who works on a specific Penn Jones collection, a special collection at the Pogue Legislative Library at Baylor University in Waco, Texas. And on Monday, we're hoping to get a little caravan to go down to Waco and visit the collection down there and look at some of the stuff he's got. So he had hoped to show something on CD, and actually should ask you about, do you have PowerPoint on your CD? Yeah. Is it possible you could come and hook it up for him while he's, yeah, if you can do that. And then, maybe he can start while you're getting that hooked up. But he also said he has handouts with some of the pictures and slides he wants to show. Let me hook this to you, Ben.
Directions to the library. If you ever want to come, I'll give you a map. And you don't have to come Monday, but a lot of people run up and down the freeway. At least in Texas, we like to run up and down between the freeway. And you can, these maps will tell you where the library is and where to park. Is anybody interested in this for your archive? Yeah. Thank you. We had about 6 members of COPA come last year after the meeting, and then another man from England came on Tuesday after that. So there was a good showing there. We're trying to progress beyond an archive just for Penn Jones papers and have a true Kennedy research archive or JFK research archive where people can come and study all aspects of the assassination or of his life. And I'll show you in the PowerPoint presentation if we get it set up. Oh, thank you so much.
This year, will the people who go be treated to the same thing like last year? Will John Judge spontaneously belt out the French national anthem?
You'll be the same torture chamber as last year. But you don't have to eat at Buzzard Billy's if you don't want to. We probably have doubled the material since last year. Last year we had the original Penn Jones papers that a friend of his, a book dealer in Fort Worth, had acquired some years ago. And this year we've obtained more materials from his sons. One is in Dallas, one is in Fort Worth. And they've pretty well given us everything out of the storage unit, hopefully except the bugs. And we've processed all of those materials.
John, you have the screen? You brought a screen in last night.
Oh, there's a screen.
Okay, let's put it up now. Slight technical difficulties.
Wait, this is going straight into this guy, though. Does this one really matter?
You can bypass that probably.
I don't know, but I don't know if this is powered. No, looks good. But he said this is. Let me see. That's all I know. It's like a toggle switch.
Oh.
I have some experience with that stuff.
Okay, good.
Your answer.
instead of putting it at the end. The Sons of Penn Jones still have some copies of Forgive My Grief. And if you'll send me an email, I will forward it to them under Jones Family Trust, because they've set up a trust fund for that money. And they'll send you information about buying the books. That part they haven't given me. But I told them we would work with them. So in your handout, the big paper is an advertisement for that. This is the advertisement for the Forgive My Grief books. And this is the brochure for our library. We are a congressional archive. We have the papers of 11 former congressmen, several Texas legislators, Lieutenant Governor Bullock, several judges, and then and what this fancy word, ancillary papers, is not any of the above, but we have those. We have a large political cartoon collection from 65 to 85, about 30,000 cartoons. We have a 9/11 collection I put together. Libraries no longer keep newspapers. Ours keeps them 4 days and they're in the trash. And then they wait for microfilm to show up. Who wants to use microfilm? So I went to the library on September 11th and said, save me the newspapers for the next week for all the newspapers you get. So they did that. So we have 24 newspapers from around the world for the next week, and we have digitized section 1 of all 24 newspapers and put them on our website. So you can not just read not only the front page, but you can read the whole section of the paper from the London Times to the New York Times. So that's what we do. A political materials library is all we do, is collect political materials. Right now we've just opened a new exhibit on former Texas Supreme Court Justice Jack Hightower, who was 80 in September, and we have his congressional papers. The plus, the top one. The plus has more than the handout.
At the overheads?
You're doing good.
Do you want me to go to the next slide, or do you want to do it?
Is it open yet?
Top.
It'll open the thing and we'll have to...
It takes it a second. Can't be too careful. So if you want,
Very good.
this arrow key right in the corner will go to the next slide.
Okay, great. Great. We're in business. Okay, this is research in the J.F. Kennedy materials. This is a private collection in a private institution. And this is one of the, as you know, anybody in a public institution can go in and do a Freedom of Information request and get anything they want. But most of the people we've worked with want the information open to everybody. And but those who have special requests, like the Penn Jones brothers wanted the World War II correspondence between their parents kept confidential, except with their permission, and that's fine. And people give us things all the time that have restrictions. Right now, the oral histories of Lieutenant Governor Bob Bullock are closed for 5 years, but those will be open eventually. Some things are closed until people die, and that's okay. But it's important that they be somewhere at the time. This is our web page for the Kennedy materials, and you see Penn Jones at the top, and there's a newspaper list, a book list, and we will we have a new book list we don't have up yet. We're updating the web pages, and we'll tell you how to get to the book list because it's in our online catalog. If you'll just type in JFK Materials as a title, we've structured it so it will bring up every book that we have on JFK, because we did that as a call number instead of just a subject listing. The call number actually says JFK. So we've put them in a special section of the library. Now, as I talked about before, the cornerstone of the collection was the Penn Jones papers. He was a Midlothian newspaper editor for 25 years and was in Dallas the day Kennedy was assassinated. And John Judge would know more of that story about how he got involved with the assassination research. But he owned the newspaper, and his theory was if you want freedom of the press, own the press. So he owned the press, and he could put anything he wanted in it, and he did. And his Midlothian did not appreciate this freedom of the press. But it's a good source of information. But every week, I guess, he had an editorial or something about Kennedy. And that's what led to the Forgive My Grief books and then the Continuing Inquiry magazine. We have the biographical information here, which we borrowed, lest I say stole, from Spartacus, so it may look familiar to you. And I think he said I could do that. And then you have these other magazines over here on the right. And these are articles about Penn Jones that we've scanned and put online. And so you can read those as well. Skeptic's Lot from Dallas, Life magazine, One Man's Obsession was in the Waco paper last year. And then I've given Spartacus credit down there. And then all the links that they've done will take you to other places also. There are 9 categories in the images and media. There are a number of cassettes. We've digitized quite a few of these. The films we have not digitized, but they're listed online. All the cassettes are listed online. All the magazines that Penn Jones had are listed online. Anything here there reflects the lists that are online. The actual items themselves may not be online, but at least we want to give researchers an idea of what's available. And they can send us email and say, I want on your website this, this, and this, and this, and we would copy it and send it to them. So you can click on any of these images and go to that section if you don't get dizzy watching it. The films and videos document the assassination. We are currently actually digitizing. I think we've done all of the videos from Penn Jones, and we're working on another collection on digitization. This is the first part of the film list, and this is what it will look like online when you go there. Maybe this is half of it. There shouldn't be anything that's not available somewhere else, but we're trying to bring it all together so it's in one place. Now on the magazines, if you go to this web page, you can click on any year, and then it'll bring up the magazine covers for that year. And it will give you the title of the article from that magazine. Now if you came to our library, we have already photocopied all the articles and put them in notebooks. So we would not have to bring a researcher the magazines because they would get their little dirty hands on them. We would just bring them the photocopies, and we can copy copies from the photocopies. And the photocopies are in sheet protectors, so we're not going to mess up the photocopies either. But then all the original magazines will be in archival free boxes in archive free envelopes if we do need them for verifying something or for display. So if you click on one of those, the list will come up like this. Now we did not make it so you can click on the image and get a big image, because Life and Look may come looking for us. So we just wanted to give you an idea of what that magazine looked like and the articles on the side that are in it. And these are there for every year. Now we've also done the same thing with the Continuing Inquiry. We've scanned the first page of each Continuing Inquiry, and you can link to the headline for that issue online and see what it looks like. And then you could contact us if you needed more of the magazine. And this is what you would get if you clicked on one of those images. Now we were missing quite a few issues, like 3 years of the Continuing Inquiry, but in the last year we've gotten everything but about 5 issues from another source. So we're doing pretty good on that. We don't have a lot of slides, but the slides we have, we've digitized and put on the website. And sometimes we've mislabeled things. So if you see we've mislabeled things, just let us know. We actually make mistakes. Now the photographs were whatever Penn Jones had. He had a packet of photographs, and we didn't know exactly who they were. Is this Gary Shaw with Penn Jones at the bottom? You might know. I think he told me that's who it was. This is a packet of photographs of people related to Penn Jones' story of the assassination. And if the name is in blue, that means someone sent us email and gave us their name, because we put it on. We didn't know who it was, but we figured if we put it on there, people would tell us who they are. So almost all of these have been identified now. And there are two pages, and this is not the whole page. Then there's a page of just photographs of Penn Jones. Now these you can click on and get the big picture, the bigger picture, and print it out if you need it. We'll be adding some more to that because we got some better ones recently. And then there's just a page of, this was a newspaper he published with these photographs on it, so we scan those, and you can click on those and blow them up too. Now you know, somebody told me from time to time he printed Mary Farrell's cards in the continuing inquiry. Is that right? So we have about 300 cards, but they only deal with the letters A, B, C. In fact, I think they only go to CA. But we scanned them all and put them all on the internet by the name of the person on the card. Now I think the maryfarrell.org has all the cards online, but they've retyped them.
Yeah, they're just in text format, but not.
Yeah, we don't have that kind of time. It was quicker to us, and I don't know that these are actually Mary Farrell's cards. Somebody told me they were. But someone said they're similar. There's no identification marks on them in Penn Jones papers.
I haven't seen the originals, so I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, so I thought it would be helpful to just put them up there and people could see what those three letters of the alphabet look like. And see, this is a manager of the Adolphus Hotel card. So if you have any questions about the images and media, visit the website, and then you can contact us there with any request you have. And archive land, we have things to get around websites, and finding aids, and series statements, and content notes, and scope and content. And these are things archivists do to give you a handle on what's available. So if you want to know what's in the Penn Jones papers, you go to the collection statement, and it'll tell you where we got it, what we did with it, where it is. The series statement will tell you exactly what's in each section that I've been telling you about, what's in images, what's in media. Scope and content will go even more detail into the types of material. So a researcher in Minnesota can go to the site, see what's available without coming to Waco, and then send us email with their request. The JFK links is arranged by topic instead of just a straight list of sites. So if you're looking for a particular topic, you can go there. And we probably haven't updated that in a year or so, so it's out of date. Now the outline to the papers in archive land, we create an outline, tells exactly what's in the collection by topic. And if you click on one of these lines online, it will take you to the page in the finding aid that describes what's in there. And this is the book's manuscript page. Penn Jones had a lot of just onion skin carbon copies of things. They weren't all published. And this is a list we had from the first load. There's also another list we got from the sons of manuscripts that were on onion skin. Some of them we have photocopied and made better copies of. There's an autobiography of Penn Jones he wrote in '62 or '63 before the assassination that's in there. There's something called The Case Against Mr. Betty, that he wrote that was never published, something to do with the Dallas police, I think. And there's a large manuscript on missing witnesses, about 200 and something pages, that we don't think he ever published. And then the second part of the outline is personal information about Penn Jones. And item 6 is called None of the Above. We can't see any connection to the assassination, but we put them in section 6. And subject files is our favorite thing because we can put anything in there. And that way if we had something about Ted Kennedy, we'd put it in the subject file under None of the Above. So we'll go back to the web page and we're going down, and you see there papers of Jack White. Many of you may know he was involved for many years with photo analysis. So he has started letting us copy his materials. He lives in Fort Worth and I live in Fort Worth, so I can easily go see him every couple of weeks and pick up materials. We've copied lots of newsletters, and we're trying to get that list online. It'll have the first page of the newsletter there also, just like the Penn Jones page. We've copied 4 boxes of magazines, and of those 4 boxes, only 4 articles were duplicates of the Penn Jones magazines. He has about 100 videos, and we're copying those and digitizing those onto DVD slowly. Unfortunately, he has all this stored somewhere in boxes, and it's usually the bottom box that I need. We listed these originally in the order online that we picked them up. January, March, June, twice in June, July. We've also gone in August and October and haven't gotten those up yet. But we're redoing this so it's arranged by newsletters, magazines, notebooks, and types of material instead of by date. We'll find that easier to use. We're up to about video 35 now, and this list is already online. Tells you what is on the videotapes. Most of it is stuff off of television from special programs, but at least it brings it all together into one place. And our students are editing out the commercials and stuff from the videos before they burn them to DVD. Now this is a list of, I think, most of the newsletters we got from him. Probably none of them were complete. We'll be missing holes in them. Ralston's newsletter, I've only seen 1 copy of. Anybody ever seen copy 2? The Steam Shovel Press is not a newsletter, but it's I think an advertisement for books. But we stuck it there. Third and fourth decade, he had pretty much all of those.
Steam Shovel is a publication too.
Is it? Okay. And I think I've only ever seen 1, but maybe there's 2. And then the continuing inquiry was already on there from the Penn Jones web page. So we're trying to get complete lists as possible of these. I think we have all of the cover-ups now, 1 through 28. Now, Jack White also photocopied tons of news clippings in the 80s and put them into subject notebooks. So there are 22 subjects, and then there are sub-subjects of those. All of those listed online. I only did the major subjects here on 1 through 11 so you could get some idea of the subjects, and they're in alphabetical order. There's 2 notebooks on just Harvey Oswald photographs and 1 notebook on the fake Harvey Oswald photographs. So those are all available. This is the other rest of the 22. And these are all put in new notebooks with new tabs, so they're easy to use. We've also put the Jack White links on our web page, the last 3 there, how the CIA framed Oswald, the photo research, and the research videos. Research videos are videos he made, 10 years ago or so. We digitized them. He sent them to a guy in Europe who put them on the web, so you can see those videos now. John Keelan in Colorado has also shared things with us. And these are tapes he actually got from the Marcus Archive at Hood College. Does that sound right? I know you want to know that, don't you? Help me out. Anybody know Marcus? Raymond Marcus Collection at Hood College is where these CDs are from. No, that doesn't ring a bell with anybody.
That makes sense. That's where Sylvia Maher and
Yeah.
Carl Weisberg.
Raymond Marcus did the early book on the bullet.
Okay.
Yeah, the bastard
The
bullet.
bastard bullet.
Well, that's whose papers these came from, but they came through John Keelan in Colorado to us. So those are all on DVD. Now on DVD also, I think. And see, the ones at the bottom are the cassette tapes from the 60s. Now we've also started sharing. Gary Shaw has also started sharing materials with us. He's not too far from Waco, so I can also run up there and borrow materials. We've already copied pretty much 20 years of the Grassy Knoll Gazette, and now we have another box of newsletters that we're copying from him also. The things listed in the slide are not newsletters, but extra things we got from him. Not that I can read it, but it's in your handout in very small type. The last person we received things from is Dr. Robert Platt. He was a friend of Penn Jones, who was a professor at Tarrant County College in Fort Worth. And he had Penn Jones come to his class every year for, probably 10, 15 years and do a lecture every year. And Mr. Platt traveled some with Penn Jones on his engagements. But after he retired, he opened a used bookstore and political memorabilia shop in the Fort Worth Stockyards and sells things from there. And about 2 years ago, he started giving us extra materials, probably 2,000 books so far, and then a lot of political memorabilia, political campaign stuff that we arrange by candidate. He's particularly liked to collect stuff on FDR, but he had a lot of JFK materials, and so we've arranged that into 7 subjects: books, magazines, newspapers, reports, newsletters, campaign materials, and media. So that list will be online for you to access also. He had things like an old LP of the Von Meter comedy routine about the Kennedy family. Here's a comic book about the Warren Report. So that brings us back to the web page, and we will be adding bars along there for Gary Shaw and Bob Platt, and then you can have your papers archived too, and we'll put your name there and link them. So all the materials need to be archived somewhere eventually, or copies of them need to be archived somewhere. Waco is not the most central location in the world, but is 100 miles from the LBJ Library, 90 miles from the George Bush Library, and 100 miles from Dallas. So in some respects, it's a central location to other research facilities. And because of the internet, it doesn't matter as much where you are, but how accessible are your materials on the internet, and how accessible are you in responding to researcher requests. The last 2 weeks, we've had a lawyer come in and doing research on Lee Harvey Oswald for a group of school children. I think they're high school children, who has an assignment or doing a mock trial of Lee Harvey Oswald. So she's using our materials to do that type of research. 2013 is the 50th anniversary, so we're trying to have enough materials in place because there'll be a lot of interest then, and we need to have the information in place. And like I said before, it's a private collection in a private institution, and we treat everything just with archival processing, acid-free folders, acid-free boxes, acid-free top loaders, so everything is preserved for a long time, and then we digitize as much as we have time to do. And my phone numbers and emails is all in the handout I gave you. If you came in late and didn't get a handout, I have plenty of them. And the last thing is the advertisement, the commercial, for the books. And if you're interested in these, just send me an email with Jones Family Trust in the subject, and I will forward it to the sons. One lives in Dallas, one lives in Fort Worth. They've been very generous in depositing additional materials, including a nice set of materials from John Howard Griffin, who wrote the Black Like Me book. And Penn Jones and his wife were very good friends with John Howard Griffin. So they, the sons had a good bit of material related to him also. Are there any questions so far?
Is his wife still in Waxahachie?
No, she passed away 4 years ago. Oh, you mean Elaine?
Yes, the second.
Oh, the second wife. She is somewhere, but not in Waxahachie. But I think somewhere near Waxahachie, in a town, I can't remember, small town.
Right. He's like his picture, he must have been with his material. He was the investigative reporter.
Mhm.
Right.
Well, he's a photo analysis. He's not a reporter. He was a professional photographer in Fort Worth.
But there was a Jack White, he was an investigative reporter who used to News Channel. Maybe it was just the same name and it's just a coincidence.
Yeah, he's about 80. Jack White's about 80 years old.
I'm thinking of, yeah, he was the investigative
That's a
reporter.
different guy.
Mhm.
This was another guy who was...
Yeah, actually, the pictures may be misleading.
This one?
Okay. If we could pass the mic to the questions, so I can...
Sure. Excuse me.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's a long
Yeah,
cord.
just bring one.
It's sitting on the floor there. When we need it, shove it over.
Yeah, the oldest one down in the middle there, that's what he looks like. He's about 80 years old. His photographic collection is at UT Arlington. He did a lot of pictures on early Fort Worth. It was his specialty, and they're all online, I think.
He's very active on the Johnson Report.
Yeah, and he's into 9/11 photo analysis right now. Spends all his time on that. So, but he still has all the Kennedy materials that he's willing to let us copy, and we're glad to do that.
He's also on the Rich Taylor Roosevelt forum a lot too. JFK Assassination.
I think he sits on the computer all day. So I'm hoping he gets a new computer for Christmas. It's a rather old Mac. And then we hope to work with him on transferring copies of all his photographs. I've already taken him a hard drive to transfer them to. Yes, sir.
Do you have any idea who put Penn Jones onto the connection between Jack Ruby and Lee Harvey Oswald?
No, do you?
I mean, he...
I guess I'm more of an archivist than a...
Reporters knew him. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's probably the first is Steph Cannon circle, but I don't know specifically, like you're saying, who put him on to that.
Give it to Joe.
If you're not near a mic, we're not going to pick it up because of that.
Oh, yeah, understood. You know, he knew a number of the press reporters here, and he was at the event, the luncheon, waiting for Kennedy to come. And then when they heard that Kennedy had been shot or the incident, a bunch of them went out and got in a car and came down to Dealey Plaza. But he probably would have known Seth Cantor or people that knew Ruby, but you know, and his early work shows that he was aware of the people that were, you know, around Ruby and that knew the Tippett and Ruby and Oswald link, but I don't know specifically who came to him.
Now, the Sons did give me a
Peter has something to say.
thing labeled Jack Ruby slipper. So it's supposed to be his house slipper.
Is it ruby red?
It looks like prison white.
I think Penn Jones was from the same area that Tippett was from growing up. I think Tippett was from around Clarksville, and I think Penn Jones was from around Clarksville.
Yeah, Anson.
I was just curious if he had known Tippett beforehand.
I would think he was much older than Tippett, wasn't he? Jones was born in 1918, around 1918. 2014, thank you. We have a history of the Jones family that was in the county history for that county. And it's about 4, 5, 6 pages.
Because we didn't get it on mic.
He was born in 1914.
You waiting to say something, Peter?
No, I just.
So we have even his college annuals from a little school he went to in Arkansas back about 1932, 33. And then he went on to University of Texas after that. Hitchhiked, I guess, on trains out to the Olympics in Los Angeles, somewhere along there. And he came back and went into the Army. So we have all his Army records and materials through 36th Infantry Division, it's artillery, one of those divisions. He kept a lot of stuff on that. A lot of photographs he took up through Northern Africa, through Italy, through France, through Germany. And so we've little pictures. Any other questions in? Yes, sir.
I have one. I just noticed as the screen was going by, there was one picture of the newspaper article about when they exhumed Oswald's body, and they looked, and the headline from the newspaper said that it had been determined that it was in fact Oswald's body, and then but I remembered seeing that I think it was the guy who did the autopsy said that the head had been severed from the body. And I'm wondering if there was any DNA taken during the autopsy and whether anybody has any clue whether that's around it. I mean, I'd be interested. They didn't have a way in those days, I don't think, of checking whether the head in fact matched the body, but they did. The guy was very surprised and had no explanation for the fact that the head had been severed from the body.
You're talking about the mortician, I think, Paul Grauer.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it was on the men who killed Kennedy. And the mortician, Paul Grauer, said that I think he knew that Oswald had not, the actual Oswald he buried, had a craniotomy.
Oh, yeah.
But when the body was exhumed, there was a head lying in the coffin with the rest of the body that did not appear to have had a craniotomy. So he wondered if the head was the same head that he saw buried in '63.
I'm passing the mic, but I do want to know, why would you do a craniotomy on someone who suffered an abdominal wound?
Preserve the brain.
I think the answer to that is that when you do an autopsy, you don't leave anything out. I mean, they were, I think they were absolutely autopsying Kennedy's genitals and everything, and he got a lousy autopsy. I think they do the whole thing, don't they, when they do an autopsy?
No.
Oh, really?
I've seen a number of autopsies, and they essentially, they're looking for something, and when they find it, something that obviously was a approximate cause of death, they usually, that's the end of it. Unless they just can't find any cause of death, then they might do the whole body, but not normally.
I know, I just want to mention something. Actually, I want to mention something about an autopsy. I was telling someone my husband was killed in a car accident, and actually when they did the autopsy, I got a copy of the autopsy report, they covered the whole body, literally. Because they were trying to determine the cause, you know, whether he had had a heart attack. Suspicion was he had a heart attack, but they did the whole body.
I'm not a doctor, but I think opening up the head is unusual from my understanding.
Unless you're looking for something.
Now, I did bring one show and tell. Penn Jones has these teletype pages from AP and UPI on the day. I have a mic somewhere. Do I have a mic?
Right.
I don't hear myself. Can you hear me?
It's a recording mic.
Recording mic. But we have, this is called encapsulation. We have not laminated it. It is just encased in inert plastic, polyurethane, polyester. And we can take it out if we need to. But these are very long rolls of paper that Penn Jones had with all of the UPI and AP releases from minute by minute from the Kennedy assassination that go on for about 12 hours. So there's about 12 sheets of these, and this was the shortest one. Most of them are very long. And some of them were falling apart because they're, 45 years old. So I figured the only way to preserve these is to put them in the plastic, and then they're very flexible, and we can scan it. You know, we can do anything else with it. So that's the type of material we have. And you're welcome to come to Waco anytime, really, and look at it or contact us online about what we have.
How's it funded?
Poorly. We do everything out of our supply budget, and we have all these other collections I told you about that we're working on. So we just do the best we can, and I only have student help to work with this. So I have a student working on Gary Shaw, and a student working on Jack White, and 2 students working on Penn Jones, and student working on Robert Platt, and then I have students working on Judge Hightower's papers, and I've been doing the exhibit and building a new rare book room this year. So everybody works on doing this, so at least our labor costs aren't high. But the acid-free boxes and materials and plastic and all that are expensive, but we just fund it out of our supply budget and do what we can. I have 2 students now working on digital projects. We have a G5 Mac that will copy the tape and digitize the tape at the same time. So then a student just has to go in and edit out the commercials or anything else we don't want, and then leave it running that night for the DVD. It's just a long-term process.
I'm going to say the question was, how was it funded? Just so that it gets.
Oh, how is it funded, indeed? So we're hoping a boat comes in somewhere.
Or inland for that.
Dallas is hoping for an inland port. Oh, that's trains, isn't it?
I have a question.
Yes,
Is
sir.
there any talk between archives to have inter-archival access so that a gateway to one archive could conceivably go to another?
Yes, there's a new program called Encoded Archival Description, which piggybacks off of XML formatting, and we have archivists around the world are trying to get into this. It's been around maybe almost 10 years in the infant stage, but it's very labor intensive, and a lot of it's done offshore where labor doesn't cost so much. But we haven't been able to do much of that because you have to have a good finding aid first before you can convert it to EAD. We did have a smart student who created a program for us in Access that we can actually fill in the blanks in Access. Click a button, it automatically converts it to the EAD format. And click on another button, it will automatically convert that to a web page or a Word document. Research Libraries Group has a lot of encoded archival descriptions online, and it will search across multiple archives. Online Archive of California has millions of archival materials, but you have to go to their page, and it will search across multiple institutions at the same time. So we're working toward that. Texas also has a program called TARO, T-A-R-O, Texas Archival Resources Online. And the big schools in Texas had got funding from somewhere to convert a lot of materials to EAD and dump these into a computer server, and you can go there and type in something and it will search across multiple institutions. Our hope right now is by putting our things online, Google will bring them up. The problem with Google, it brings up 1 million of them. So if you put in something, put the word Baylor after it, and then it will only go to Baylor and search for things. Now we do have a search engine on the Baylor website, but you have to know to go to Baylor, and who would know that? So our long-term goal would be, like you say, have it in a database for everybody. Yes, sir.
I have a simpler potential start of a solution for an enterprising person, and I'm not volunteering for this, which is that Google now makes available their search engine in a variety of forms. And something that's new is the ability to create a website which could have nothing on it, literally, and then index selected sites and create a search engine on that one page which will search just the sites that you put into it. And so someone could very easily at least create a Google page which just takes the 30 or 40 websites that you want. I mean, using Google overall, the whole internet is not such a bad idea either, but if you do want to filter things out, that'd be one mechanism for doing it.
If anybody gets a website up for John, we'll have links to everything that we feel strongly about there, but we don't have that, so.
Hopefully you will soon.
Do I need to turn this off, or is somebody using it next? Or you have a question?
Yes. It's probably not relevant just yet, but at some point in the future, would your school be interested in like the collected papers of Lawrence Teeter, Sirhan's attorney? We're still using them right now, but at some point down the road, I mean, there are a lot of other papers regarding his environmental work because he did a tremendous amount of environmental litigation, but there's a significant number of files and legal documents that he prepared over the years in Sirhan's case, including stuff to save the Ambassador Hotel. Is that a type of collection that you would want?
Anything related to the political process as a whole. And Penn Jones did collect RFK materials. In fact, he printed this huge poster, maybe 2 big posters on RFK, showing different scenes in the assassination process, trying to document that. So it may be something that would fit in our collection, or there are a lot of schools also probably in Los Angeles that would like that, like Stanford.
Not necessarily. I've actually talked to a couple of law schools, so
but
I'd want them to go to some place.
Well, law schools don't generally have archives is the problem.
Okay. So you think it would be better to put it in Los Angeles than your schools more focused?
But that might be if you find the right archive.
Yeah.
And you need an archive that's going to make it accessible, not hide it away in boxes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Because we have the same problem with congressional archives. People have put their congressional papers in a library somewhere who really can't make them accessible. Yes, sir. Is that okay? If you came in late and didn't get the handout, we have the whole slideshow and free pins. You get a free pin.
People are going to still be here on Monday, are welcome to come in our little caravan. I don't know if I'm going to sing the French national anthem or not.
You might have learned a new song by then.
That's true. I'm inspired to something else. We'll go out to Baylor and take a look at this. Ben's been gracious enough to host us last year and this year again. It's a fascinating collection. There's a great picture of Penn laughing. He had a tremendous sense of humor. I don't know if any of you got to hear any of his lectures ever, but it was probably one of the funniest lectures on the assassination. And
The torch is passed.
yeah, I remember used to say, we've been in the death grip of the military-industrial complex since November 22nd, 1963. Now let's all pray I'm wrong.
Is that part of, is any of that audio and or video part of what's being digitized?
If we had it, I think we digitized it. I put online, I'm trying to think what's online. I know that John Judge's speech when Penn Jones got the award in '95 is online. And I've forgotten, it's been over a year since we did that, but I know that video we not only digitized, but we put that online. But the list of everything that's digitized is online. We'll have to get us a code there to let you know if there's a digital format, because if there is a digital format and you need it, then we can burn you a DVD for $100 or so and send it to you, and then we'll have funding.
Yeah, were you asking whether some of his lectures were up at the site? Is that what you were trying to get at, I think?
I don't know if there are lectures. There are a lot of radio interviews, some things from California. Mr. Platt, I don't think, recorded the lectures from the community college back then, so we don't have those. But everything is listed, and if something has not been digitized and somebody wants it, then we can digital on demand for another 100 and send that to you.
Is it possible to get a copy of Von Meter's recording? Von Meter, when he was doing the impersonations?
Does anybody know if that's a violation of copyright?
Yeah.
Probably. It's an album, but I think it's possible to get the album still. I mean,
And we
Amazon.
have at least two copies of it from different sources even, I think.
Yeah, it would depend on his permission.
But is he still living? We could, probably, we could
Research
make
that.
it, and then the problem is if you wanted to reproduce it or something illegally, see. I think that's the problem.
You don't have to contact them if you need it. There's a record company that would still own, that's probably still in business, probably a major record company, and you can purchase it from them, I'm sure.
We actually have a meter record of the Johnson family, too.
Yeah, well, I also saw just recently, I don't surf much, but I saw it was either YouTube or the Google video, and I was looking for videos of Penn Jones, that's how I did the search. But there was a videotape of Mark Lane walking along with him and interviewing him and talking to him about the issues and those things. And somewhere I either have or have seen a full lecture of his at one of the universities. If I could dig it back up, you know, glad to pass it on. So, but I guess if Rex is ready to do his piece, we'll move on to that. And Rex, a longtime researcher and investigator, and also a lot of technical skills. So he started digitizing all of this stuff a few years back and scanning in the records that were being released under the JFK Act. And he's helped the Assassination Archive and Research Center do CDs of the medical records and other kinds of collections of records, focused ones, and get those out. And then more recently, he's tied up with the new Mary Farrell.
Not tied.
Yeah, tied up. It probably feels tied up, all the work you do. But he's been working with the Mary Farrell collection and a website that has, and I'm sure he'll talk about it, a lot of links to archive materials, and then hopefully he'll tell us some things that he's finding there in all those papers he's scanning. So Rex Bradford.
There's got to be something in there.
Is that CD still in there?
Yeah, I'm trying to get it out. I think it doesn't want to get rid of it.
I noticed that. It's attached to it. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Hello? I'll talk first, and I have slides as well.
The lights up. Blinds.
Okay. What's that? Not sure. Okay. All right, I'm Rex Bradford for people that don't know me, and I'm getting wired. Wow.
Sorry.
Is this going to be on CBS tonight?
Yes.
Good. And my particular focus has been on using the computer skills I have to get the vast documentary record, particularly stuff that came out from the JFK Records Act online. And been working on that since about '99, I think. And that's been a fun project. Like John said, for the last year or so, I've been working with the Mary Farrell Foundation, which is a small nonprofit, taking what I had gotten started in a website called History Matters, if people know about that, and sort of taking it up to the next level so that the documents are searchable and there's a much greater quantity at this point. In my other hat, I'm the vice president of the Assassination Archives and Research Center, of which Jim Lazar is the president. Many people know him. And so that works out nicely in this venture because we're currently in the project of taking virtually the entire CIA collection of files and putting them online. And we're probably about the 30 or 40% point at this point. And in fact, what I want to spend a little bit of time is going through some of the interesting stuff I ran across while taking out staples. This is backbreaking work. If anybody really wants to volunteer, speak to me later. I spent, sorry to report, probably a couple hours a night for the last 6 months taking staples out of 160 boxes of CIA records, but they're on their way online. In general, I think for people that know about the Mary Farrell site, there's been some confusion, I think, because of lack of communication on my part about exactly how it works. And so I wanted to explain for people that are interested that the material, all the material is available for browsing there. We are trying to find some ways of generating a little bit of revenue, and without a whole lot of success so far. We've written a few grants that haven't been picked up on. But what we've done as an attempt to try to make that work is that we do take memberships for $40 a year, and what that affords people is the search engine. The documents are still, there's a nice browsing engine for people that don't want to cough up the money, and you can email links to any single item on the site to someone else, and I think on the Simkin forum, actually, there's a fair amount of people that are starting to use it, which is real nice. But without further ado, what I'd like to do is spend a little bit of time doing, I'll stand up again, a walkthrough of some of the stuff I've run across in the last 6 months. Most of these documents have been around since the late 90s, so I'm sorry to say this is not necessarily groundbreaking research, but some of them I think are probably unknown. Where am I here? Oh, sorry. And this is, many people know that the CIA has a relationship to the assassination of some form. And this is not a talk with an overarching theme. The methodology is go through boxes, take staples out, and say, oh, this is interesting, and make a note and look for it later. And so I wanted to show a few things about that. And first, I'd like to introduce the collection in general for people that are interested in stuff in the CIA files. Tell you a little bit about sort of the lay of the land. If anybody is doing active research or writing a book on the not too secret war against Castro, there are voluminous files in there about the people, subject files and personnel files on all the people involved. I think operational files is a mixed bag. There's not a great deal of that, but a lot of it leaks through. This is, oh, I think I just lost one of the microphones. Sorry. Okay, well. Most of it is there because of the House Committee. The House Committee did a great deal of investigation around or of the CIA, depending on who you ask. And most of the files are things that were shown to the House Committee and then put away in a so-called segregated collection. And those are further divided. They're not organized like FBI files or something in quite an organized way. A lot of it is just sort of what happened to be being produced for the HSCA over time. Oh, okay. Maybe I'll sit down and talk. So the first three sets of boxes there are basically all HSA-related stuff. Then there's the Oswald 201 file, which became an assassination investigation file. And then some other particular files, Office of Security, the Latin American Division, which has a lot of interesting stuff, sort of more recent stuff about the anti-Castro operations. The last one is interesting. This is actually something that's already fully online, and I did a DVD set a few years ago. It's sort of, I don't know a great deal about it, but Russ Holmes was an archivist who happened to be in counterintelligence and sort of kept the JFK assassination file on behalf of the CIA for their own internal use. And there's a lot of overlap between that and the other stuff. I think it was Malcolm Blunt maybe that alerted me that Russ Holmes had applied to work at the review board in the 90s, and I think his application fails to cover his CIA employment. He wasn't hired. So this is the status we're at. The AARC collection, for people that are interested, Mark Allen filed a lawsuit in 1981 to get records from both the CIA and FBI of what they had shown to the House Committee. And that went on for 17 years. And finally, when all those files were being delivered to the National Archives anyway, both agencies settled. And Mark Allen deposited the records in with the AARC. And that's where the paper's coming from. And I've done a little bit of analysis to try to see how closely this matches what's in the National Archives. And you know, I can't do a document by document thing, but in terms of the collections, it's at the high 98, 99% level. There's a few areas where I think things got updated after the ARC received them, but it's pretty close. And then in 2003, there was a series of further unredactions that are only at the National Archives. That's the item there on the bottom. Oh, and I have a laser pointer.
They can be scanned.
They can be. Those 8,000 documents themselves were interfiled. So what you have to do, and what I intend to do in my spare time, is go to the archives and get a hold of the 8,000 RIF pages, which they have in a box. And then you have to go out and find them. So it's a little bit of a time-consuming process. The Lopez report was among them, and I already got an updated copy of it, which actually we are selling in book form. The Mary Farrell Foundation, there's a new venture that I'm very proud to be part of, which is Hood College has the rights to Harold Weisberg's and Sylvia Maher's books, and we made an agreement with them to republish those books and share the minimal profits from them. And so we're making those available, currently just whitewash and accessories after the fact, but we'll be doing all of Harold's books. And then separately, a pet project of mine is to start making some of the impossible to find reports available in printed form. I have them all online, so nobody has to buy them, but books are convenient. So the Lopez report is now available, and I intend to do all of the House Committee reports, and probably more Church Committee as well. The topics of the documents I mentioned, anti-Castro operations is a big part of it. The Mexico City mysterious trip is a big part of it. There's a lot of liaison with the various agencies, particularly the HSCA. There's 30,000 pages of notes on CIA-related topics taken by House Committee staffers, which were kept at CIA in their safes, and that's part of it. And defectors, there's a lot of material. It's a pretty rich collection. And the names that you'll hear are familiar to many people. I won't go into any detail here. So let me show off a few of the documents. I think I have way too many slides here, so we'll just skip around a bit, but a few that are interesting. This is something that some people may have seen before, but I ran across it recently and hadn't seen it and found it fascinating. This is read to the President on the 3 days after the assassination, I believe by McGeorge Bundy, although it doesn't say on the document. And there's a few names of Lee Harvey Oswald and some basic information on him. It's about a 3 or 4 page document, and it has some interesting things in it. It talks about the Mexico City trip in some detail and mentions him being in contact on the 26th of November and the 3rd of October, which are both incorrect dates by our current understanding from the records of what happened. And 26 October is repeated in other places in documents that are not sort of outside the official set of cables. And I like to collect these anomalies about early reporting on that trip that don't match what we later got as received wisdom from the cables and so forth. The White House still thinks it's a Mauser 3 days later. And then there's a lot of discussion points about what went on in Mexico. Was Fidel Castro behind the assassination, based on some of the stuff that came from the tapped phone calls? Were the Cubans housing him in Mexico City? And were the Soviets possibly involved? And in 3 or 4 pages, what seemed to me like the most explosive piece of information coming from the tapped telephone calls, and Oswald contact with a KGB assassination expert is never mentioned. On paper, anyway. There's a lot of detail on topics, some of which are already familiar and some of which may be new to people. Alvarado, most people may be aware that this is the guy who walked into the U.S. Embassy on November 25th, or contacted them on that day with a story that he had been, back in September, he had seen Oswald take $6,500 to kill Kennedy in the Cuban embassy. And some of the new information in the files is just simply things like a number of these kind of reports from early '63 showing that information based on Alvarado, who was indeed a penetration agent working in the Somoza government, information was being passed around. He was an infiltrator of the FLN in Nicaragua, and some of this information even made it to the ambassador level in a couple of countries, and with his name attached in one case at least. There were a lot of stories of communist conspiracy bubbled out of Mexico City, and this is now known to be a major factor in the federal response. Lyndon Johnson calling people on the phone and saying 40 million Americans are going to die if we go to the war with the Soviets, and we got to, put a lid on this thing. And I think there's many indications that there are other stories that never appeared in the record we have today. And this is just one that caught my eye, where Ambassador Mann on the 26th down in Mexico is being informed of yet another story of a news photographer who claimed to be on a bus with Oswald, whose baggage included a rifle and a leather case down in Mexico.
That should say U.S. consulate in Guadalajara.
I'm sorry, Guadalajara. It's being sent to Ambassador Mann from Guadalajara.
Consulate in Guadalajara, not in Embassy.
Okay. Glad Peter's here. This one is also related to Mexico City, and I found it kind of fascinating. I'm not going to go through the details, but there's a guy named Larry Keenan, who people may know about, who, when Ambassador Mann in Mexico was shouting to the rooftop, sending telegrams up to the White House and State Department, that I've got to get some help down here, we've got a communist conspiracy, we want to confront Alvarado with Sylvia Duran, who dealt with Oswald, and get to the bottom of this nasty commie plot. A curious thing happened. Larry Keenan was sent down from FBI headquarters with a sort of a mixed message to obtain the desired results, as it was described, which was clearly to shut Ambassador Mann up. But also, he believed he was going to go down and actually interview Alvarado and Duran and do some kind of investigation. And almost the moment he arrived, Sylvia Duran was rearrested by the Mexicans and whisked out from under his thumb. And then what this document describes is on the 28th, when Keenan was actually down there sitting on his hands waiting to interview Alvarado, who was in CIA hands, a little back and forth back in Washington went up, where Papich of the FBI is saying to the CIA, well, Alvarado is your source. And they're saying, no, he's not our source. And there were phone calls back and forth all morning on the 28th, until finally J. Edgar Hoover steps in and says, fine, he's ours, and we direct you to turn him over to the Mexicans immediately, which happened at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And Larry Keenan's sitting there, and boom, off goes Alvarado, and he's no longer going to be interviewed. And this is part of what we now have a pretty good time frame for, of the clampdown to shut down the allegations in Mexico. On the 27th, the day that Keenan arrived, Wynne Scott sent out this memo to all station employees to stop talking about who killed Kennedy, otherwise that he'll send them to Washington and recommend their dismissal. So there's a lot of this kind of detail on Mexico City, which is interesting. Let's see. Let me skip ahead a bit. there's a lot of, you get a little bit of a flavor. I don't want to defend the House Committee's work because I think there's many problems with it, but I think it's certainly a mixed bag. And one of the things you get a flavor for with all this liaison work is how much bitterness was being created between the two agencies. In a meeting between Blakey and Scott Breckenridge of CIA, the message from CIA is that your inquiry is broadening unreasonably. You're only down here to talk about a 5-day visit of Oswald and what follows, to which Blakey replies that he's indeed investigating CIA, and I said he's not. And the subject of bringing up the Director of Central Intelligence for criminal prosecution was raised, and there's a lot of this sort of stuff in the files. Again, on Mexico City, there's a little more corroboration for things that are sort of already known. I don't think they're set in stone, certainly, but this idea of 2 human informants in the Cuban embassy in Mexico City, telephone tap operation, obviously, but also some corroboration for microphones having been planted in there, and we've seen nothing of the take from microphones. And the documents which talk about them are pretty imprecise on time frames, although there's certainly indication that at least some were planted in the embassy. Whether there was any in the consulate, which is where most of the action took place, is unknown.
Are we in a hurry? Should I hold the question? Or?
No, feel free.
The,
this is an open-ended talk, and I'm not going to show everything anyway.
You
so.
just went by a thing that said about somebody suggesting we hold the director of CIA in contempt.
Right.
Would that have been George Bush that they were speaking of? Which director of CIA?
Stansfield Turner at this point.
At that point.
Yeah.
Carter
yeah.
man.
What's that?
He was Carter man, though.
Yeah. There's a lot of letters between Turner and Chairman Stokes, which are fairly heated. Basically, the committee was fairly convinced that photographs of the actual Lee Harvey Oswald had been obtained and that they were being withheld. Some of this came from Win Scott's manuscript in which he discussed this, but there was more than that. Whether they're right or not is an open question. They also had a couple of CI officers tell them that they saw those photographs. A guy named Joseph Piccolo was one of them. And they were extremely concerned about that in particular. There was also issues that they had thought they had been promised access to agents down in Mexico, and the CIA worked vigorously to keep them from interviewing most of them. For instance, there was a guy named Manuel Carvillo who it looked like had escorted a woman named Elena Guerrero de Paz to a hotel. It's a complicated story, and there's questions about exactly when she was telling her story, but it was one of these stories of communist conspiracy involving people in the Cuban embassy. And they wanted to interview Carvillo. They got from CIA files his address. They went there, and they were told by the manager of the apartment building that the guy had never lived there, and they had all the possible alias names as well. And the committee ended up believing that the U.S., the way they described it actually in the Lopez report was that some agency of U.S. government had prevailed upon the Mexican government to prevent us from interviewing this person. That was their belief. And so there was a lot of this kind of stuff where they were trying to vigorously investigate Mexico City and feeling like they're getting blocked and getting bad information.
Can I make 2 small comments?
Sure.
One is, I believe, you can check with Larry Keenan, but I believe that Larry Keenan was aware of Guerrero de Paz when he was down there a week after the assassination. And another point, that what interested me in the Lopez report, where there's a brief discussion of the frustrations they experienced, that the DFS officer who was escorting them around and escorting them badly was Miguel Nasser Aro, who was later protected by the CIA and the FBI. He was indicted in San Diego and was head of a car smuggling ring, and the FBI reported on behalf of the CIA that he was one of the top CIA assets in the whole of Latin America, not just in Mexico. So I think that's one of the reasons why I think that Guerrero de Paz story is extremely sensitive. And of course, apparently Win Scott believed it, as we know from a document 5 years later.
This is just one of the several documents that talks about hidden microphones. Again, when you get, in some cases, there's a lengthy Mexico City station history, which is fascinating, although it's about 3/4 blacked out. But what leaks through is the clear impression that the Cuban embassy was a target which was covered in many, many ways. If you want to do your own telephone tapping, the CIA is happy to provide diagrams. see. It's interesting, some of the things you find in these files that you would think would be found elsewhere. I haven't done an exhaustive view of HSA files by any means, but I did at one point request and receive all the boxes of executive session transcripts. And I found one in the CIA files, which was not in that set from the Sprague era, which is interesting. And in fact, it was discussing some of the most sensitive information about the information they were getting from the telephone tap stuff. So I'm trying to give mostly a flavor. Again, I'm not trying to tell a coherent story here, and Mexico City is just one aspect, although a fairly big one, of the records. Let's see. There's more interesting things than telephone tapping. Scott and Allen, who were two journalists in Virginia who wrote a lot about the Warren Report and reported from apparently right-wing sources, a lot of stories that were embarrassing to the Warren Commission during its tenure. During 1963, they were subject to telephone tapping. This shows up in Weisberg's security file, of all places, because he was a friend of one of them. And it's curious whether that might have continued in 64. There's a lot of, indications, I guess, that there was a lot of tapping going on in 63 and 64, and we certainly haven't seen any of the take from it. This is one of the articles that those guys published that had information that wasn't generally known. This is just an oddball one that I thought people might find interesting. ZR Alert was, it's a discussion, internal discussion in CIA that the House Committee is about to stumble upon a Project ZR Alert involving the use of hypnotism in certain operational situations. And the reason they might stumble upon it is because this was going on in Mexico City in the summer of '63. And so they might see it in the files that are being done. And this is the only thing on this project I've seen, so I couldn't describe it for you. All right, let me skip on a bit. There's a lot, this is some papers on June Cobb Sharp, who was an informant to the CIA. There's a lot of information about informants, assets, people that had some kind of relationship. There's more what I think are new documents, at least compared to John Newman's book on Priscilla Johnson, who was a reporter, one of the two that interviewed Oswald in Moscow, and some of the projects that are liaison projects with journalists over there that they're involved in. There's a lot on a variety of defectors for people that find that stuff interesting, and I just picked a couple at random. This is Bruce Davis, was a guy who defected from the Army, generally similar time frame from Oswald's, and he was interviewed extensively by the Defense Department on his return and gave them all kinds of information about the city of Kiev and what was going on there, including maps. Much more professional than what Lee Oswald created. I don't know if people have seen this. This is Commission Exhibit 92, sitting right there in the Warren volumes, and it's a sort of, badly typed, badly spelled history of my life in Minsk, which has pages in it which are amazing for their detail about how many radios were produced in my plant and what building was next to it and what building was next to that and what they did there and so forth. Let's see, let me skip ahead. Nosenko, you can read thousands of pages about the internal write-ups that Nosenko was a plant, or no, he wasn't a plant, or yes, he was, or no, he wasn't, including polygraphs and so forth. This one I found interesting. I'm only aware of one case of a sort of partial admission, or I guess an admission by CIA, that any of these defectors were actually agents of the US government. I think there's a story in the mid-70s when CBS had run across information that Oswald was one such and were convinced that it was somebody else, and this became known publicly. This is one document I ran across of a report about a meeting with HSA staffers in which they, I forget who wrote this and I don't have it down here, but about someone who had run an agent, a CIA officer who had run an agent in the USSR, and that man had met a Russian girl and married her, and describes it a little bit. And so they told HSA staffers about one such case, and in the HSA defector study there's no mention of any of this stuff. it's not Oswald they're talking about by general context, even though it certainly matches him. And in fact, my guess, although it's only a guess just from the limited information there is, that it's possibly this guy, who is written up in the House Committee Defector Report. That's where this comes from.
Did Nosinko ever offer an opinion of Angleton?
I don't know. I mean, in later years or something?
Well, I had seen Nosinko appear publicly over in Clear Lake at a college I attended, and he was quite liberal in expressing his opinions. And I know that Angleton expressed many opinions about Nosinko.
Angleton, yeah, was certainly a true believer that Nosinko was part of a Russian plot, against them. But I hadn't heard about Nosinko's take on Angleton.
I've never found it. I was just wondering if you'd heard of it.
If people have read Lamar Waldron's book, Ultimate Sacrifice, there's this purported Kennedy coup plan. The paperback edition now names the coup leader, Juan Almeida, who's still at the Cuban government. And the book touts that AmWorld, Project AmWorld, which is something of which documents were released fairly late in the review board's life, was the CIA's portion of this plan. And I don't even want to get into a real discussion of all of the truth or untruth of that. But the Project AmWorld documents, many of them are in fact available on the Mary Farrell site, and you can read them for yourselves. And on their face, what they are is the project to move Manuel Artime to Nicaragua and set him up to not be doing sabotage from onshore the U.S., but to be creating a force against Cuba from offshore. And there's a fair amount of detail. There are not operational files per se, I think, but there's certainly a lot of memos and information back and forth. And if you are on the Mary Farrell site and just do a search for AmWorld, you can find them. Let me skip over this stuff. There's some interesting MLASH, people may know, was in mid to late '63, was yet another coup and/or assassination plan involving a fairly high-level Cuban named Rolando Cubella. And there's a little more detail from stuff that I had seen before, at least, including him naming other people that were part of his group that would be involved in a coup. And just again, on the level of detail, the CIA has kindly provided an English version of the transcript of the trial of Cubella a couple years later when he was arrested by the Cubans. And this was a fascinating little note I found that literally is just this. There is no from, there is no to, there's just a piece of paper that has only this on it. And if people know the story, Desmond Fitzgerald, who was chief of the Special Affairs staff, because Cubella wanted Robert Kennedy's personal assurance that he was behind this overthrow of Castro, he requested a meeting with Robert Kennedy, and instead Desmond Fitzgerald went and represented himself as the personal emissary of Bobby Kennedy. I think people are on both sides of this. Certainly Richard Helms told the Church Committee that Bobby Kennedy was never informed. We just did this on our own. Other people take the view that Fitzgerald was a social friend of the Kennedys, and this was probably, a backroom operation that they met and discussed it. This little piece of paper just says that the above contact in Paris, which is Fitzgerald's meeting representing himself as Robert Kennedy's emissary, if that doesn't produce the necessary results, then based on a new assessment, we'll think about bringing Cubella to the U.S. by military aircraft with first-class treatment and accommodations and a meeting with another high government official. And so this is the maddening part of the CIA files, is you get a lot of interesting information and leads, and some of it doesn't go anywhere. Let me see. Oh, this is one of my favorites. More of the bitterness between the committee and the CIA in discussions about whether the CIA withheld relevant information from the Warren Commission. Scott Breckenridge says, well, if we had reports on why the monkeys lost their tails in Zamboango, it would not be provided, as it had nothing to do with the Kennedy assassination, though House Committee investigators might think it did. CIA officers are nothing but erudite. I actually searched for Zamboanga and found that this is in fact an old folk song about monkeys losing their tails in Zamboanga, so he didn't make it up out of thin air. John Whitten, aka Celso, takes a beating in CIA internal memos. They're not very happy with him.
Who's the they there? Is that
That Scott Breckenridge is writing that. One of the saddest set of documents that I found in the whole collection has to do with Martin Luther King. You know, people may know the Martin Luther King files of the House Committee are still withheld. Cynthia McKinney and John Kerry in the House and Senate introduced MLK Records Acts, which haven't gone anywhere at this point. Some of this stuff leaks through. There was a guy named Jay Kennedy who provided information on Martin Luther King, and so those files, because they had the word Kennedy in them.
You should call it.
Well, yeah.
He's under the control of people.
Yes, yeah. This particular thing is a copy of literally trash pickings from when King was in Miami. It's a copy that happened to make its way to JM Wave, although I don't think the CIA was doing the actual sweep. It's probably FBI, and they handed a local copy off.
Do you know who Anne Frisk is?
I do not.
Well, obviously a common Cuban activist.
Yeah, the Cuban prefix is interesting, isn't it? Yeah, and Jay Kennedy talking about all the communist stuff related to King. You know, what's not shown here, there's some amazing papers that I probably can't describe very well because I only read them a couple of years ago. But when the People's Campaign of 1968 was, you know, being organized, there are some papers flying back and forth in CIA in March in which they're treating this upcoming event with apoplectic visions. This is taken very seriously. People in Washington, at least some, were extremely worried.
Hey, Carlson couldn't be here, does the King records, collection at Stanford, and is doing the King papers. Said that he would like to include those documents,
Sure, can you put them in touch with me?
Yeah, and he wanted to put them in the volumes if you can get provenance on them.
Okay, sure. This is an example, I guess, of how far maybe we haven't come in 30 years, which is Senator Schweiker appearing on public television in 1976 saying that the Warren Report has collapsed like a house of cards and discussing the senior intelligence officials who directed the cover-up. And that's a U.S. Senator 30 years ago. Let's see, just about done here. I'd be happy to answer questions because we've only done a smattering. This is just, in the 1990s, many KGB agents came in from the cold with stories that Oswald was one of our agents, or no he wasn't, you're crazy, or yes he was, or no he wasn't, and you know, most of them are not worth the paper they're printed on. Many of them, of course, Oswald wasn't, but Marina was. And a few of them are kind of interesting. I don't know, I haven't looked up Stanislav Shukevich, but at least in 1992, apparently he was the head of Belarus, and made a comment to someone at one point that he'd actually been working at the Minsk plant and had given Oswald Russian lessons. And okay, the last one is my favorite. In 1996, an unnamed U.S. ambassador received a postcard from Minnesota which said, "The CIA assassinated President Kennedy on orders from the military-industrial complex headquartered in New York City. David Rockefeller is chairman of this group. Write him at Chase Manhattan Bank, 1 Chase Plaza, New York City, 1005, and have a nice day." And my favorite part about this is, although this is priceless in and of itself, the date has been partially redacted. Is this 1896? Is it 2096?
I commented on that. It's
You did.
a day and a month and a year, and they're suppressing the day and the month.
There's no.
And it's 1996.
Is there room for that? Are you saying this is retyped and
I
it's?
think it was another document. But anyway, that's what I would anticipate.
And why does that matter?
Because they want to, make it untraceable.
I
Make
see.
it untraceable, you can't have the exact date. That's very standard.
Okay. All right. Well, I retract my my second joke.
I ain't got one of those listeners.
Anyway, so this is a major project, like I said, that will probably be at it for much of the next year, getting the rest of the collection up. And we have a great deal of other documents. I'm still running the History Matters website, and there's certainly materials there. I don't update it as often as I did before, putting a lot of effort into the Mary Farrell site. And some of the other new documents there, I was at the archives and got a subset, I just didn't have time to get it all, of the Rockefeller Commission papers, which are there. Some medical stuff there, and one thing that I hadn't realized in going through those papers was that they were well aware in some detail of the assassination plots and just decided not to write about it. And there's even a couple internal memos from staffers saying, are you sure this is a wise course of action not to make this stuff public? And of course the church committee then picked up the ball and did the work for them. And some smaller collections, papers of Will Fritz, and I forget some other ones I've done. But the CIA is a big focus at this point. The ARC is also in possession of a voluminous set of FBI files, which is on my radar screen as well for the not too distant future. Anyway, thanks.
In the book Regicide, they published some documents that are purportedly CIA documents. Have you ever seen anything in the documents you've received that in any way resemble those in Regicide?
I guess I'm a person who's skeptical of that book. I know that the list of CIA agents in the appendix is, my understanding is it's the AFIO, David Phillips Retired Organization. It's a list of subscribers, which includes Mary Farrell and some other people. So I don't put too much stock in that. The other content of the book, I mean, you could argue about pieces of it. I don't believe there was an Operation Zipper. And where's Colonel Samay's signature anyway, if they've got all these people?
I have another question, but I'll just comment on Regicide.
Sure.
The center part of it is a DIA document from 1975. I think that's authentic.
Really?
It certainly sounds like what they would have thought, and I think is very informative. Whether it's genuine or not, but I think it is genuine.
Well, I think there's three parts of the book. There's that, there's the Operation Zipper sort of towards the back, and then there's the supposed Russian or Soviet report as well. Although that one, to me, when I read it, it's a mechanism to explain the Warren report without having to quote the Warren report. I mean, that's the way it reads, so I viewed that one skeptically, but I don't know if you have comments on that.
My question is, how do we explain the unredactions? Are they required by some law to proceed with the unredactions, or is it?
Do you mean there's officially a schedule for unredactions. Yeah. My understanding is that by 2017 they're all supposed to be lifted. There are others which have dates on them, but the problem is enforcement. For instance, I think 2001 was the date when Celso would turn DeWitten across this vast collection, and to my knowledge, nobody's done the work to do that. I certainly see in the archives documents with Celso on them, for instance.
But this was an agreement between the ARRB and the agency? Or?
Yes, I guess I don't know the exact legal status of that agreement, but I think it's a real one. But again, enforcement is the issue, and it's already not being enforced. I mean, people may be aware of Jeff Morley's lawsuit on records for George Joannides, and it's interesting that case was recently dismissed, although it's going to be appealed. And there, the CIA's response basically entirely ducked the issue of whether those records should be treated under the JFK Records Act. They just ignored that part of the argument and responded in the FOIA way, and the judge went along with them and never ruled on that issue. And so the JFK Records Act itself is still, in theory, in effect, but in practice, it's not.
There's annual reviews by the agencies as well that sometimes unredact things.
Yeah. Well, yeah, like I said, that
some were postponed to dates certain or to events certain. In other words, they're postponed until the agent dies or the method's no longer used. But you're right, everything's supposed to clear in 2017.
Another thing that sort of occurred to me, I guess, when looking, through all these papers, not that I, was able to read them actually, is that I think we have a richness enough of the record from some of these agencies that you start to see some of the holes in them. I mean, the Joanides is one example where there's clearly a hole. There's no 17 months he was the case officer for the DRE, and there's no monthly reports for that period. And there's other examples. I mean, in the case of the Secret Service, we know that they actually destroyed files in 1995, and the ARB, reported that. But there, I think enterprising people might want to try to map out the landscape of what ought to be there at this level of detail and just isn't, as one way of finding out both what might be requested or at least where the skeletons are.
I believe Angleton had an assistant named Claire, possibly Petty, who he assigned to find the mole in the CIA, and then after years of arduous work, the assistant determined that the mole was actually Angleton, and it was a voluminous report he submitted. I wondered if that's been declassified yet.
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I haven't seen it, but I certainly couldn't say authoritatively. Pat?
I was wondering, we're both from Massachusetts, I know
Right.
that. How much, if any, how much, if any, of this material on JFK did you find at the JFK Library in Boston?
I've been to the library 3, 4, or 5 times maybe, mostly to get photographs. I mean, virtually none of this material. They're not a repository for CIA files, and they don't pretend to be. They do have a great deal of papers there. I certainly haven't personally pressed. I know that in general, they're National Archives, so they have to follow certain rules, but they seem a bit touchier about this sort of thing. And since I am down in Washington and stuff, and the National Archives has a richer collection, I haven't taken the time to really try to do more than do photo research at the JFK Library, because they have a wonderful set of White House photographs from that period.
Yeah, because I've only been there once, and I was working on
So
my
I don't have a good detailed sense of what they have, to tell you the truth.
Okay.
Rex, would you say a little bit about institutional noncompliance with the JFK Records Act, withheld files?
Sure. I guess I don't know how much more. I've already talked a little bit about Secret Service destruction, which the review board was not happy about. I talked to Doug Horn at one point, who was on the review board, and this was done in 1995, literally within a couple of weeks of them. I don't know if they were formally notified not to destroy records. I'm actually not sure about that, but it was clear that it was not the right thing to do, I guess. And he said that people in the review board were furious about this, but it was early in their tenure, and they made a political decision not to take on one of these major agencies as one of their first orders of business. And they decided, they wrote about it in a polite but, not happy way in a paragraph in their final report, but they made the decision not to pursue it, given that the records are apparently already destroyed. I mean, they could have started hauling people in to give depositions about the destruction, and they did not elect to do that.
Will it still be done?
I would think so. It was only done 11 years ago. I'm sure the people involved in the destruction are likely around, many of them.
I mean, isn't it technically a crime to destroy records? No, isn't it a criminal offense to destroy records? And
those records were covered by the review board, the JFK Act, so to destroy them was.
I would expect so.
Not all destruction of any record is a crime, but those were specifically under the JFK Act.
Yeah, these were files like about the Chicago trip, for instance, which is of great interest to many people.
I'll just comment on 2 things from personal knowledge. I asked the review board to get the Mexico City file on Harvey Lee Oswald. I was interested, by the way, there were all those pseudonyms or aliases for Oswald, and there was a Harvey Oswald Lee there, but no
Harvey Lee.
Oswald.
Yeah.
It's the same thing in the FBI file. Then they give all the alternative things to search for. They do not put in Harvey Lee Oswald, but unmistakably they had a file on Harvey Lee Oswald. And the review board has a section of their report in which they say that the FBI was unable to find the file. But we can actually reconstruct a fair amount of that file now, because there were so many post-assassination reports that, coming from Merida, I think, one of the regional FBI offices in Mexico, hadn't been clued in that we were to forget about Harvey Lee Oswald, and he kept submitting things to Lee Harvey Oswald file giving a number, and a Harvey Lee Oswald file giving an earlier number, which is, of course, terribly important because it means that originally they were filing them under Harvey Lee. And I feel that the ARRB treated the FBI very gently there because it was conspicuous from what they had obtained that the file existed, and that they got stuff from it, and just because of it being double filed. The other thing is, I'll be talking about this afternoon, is, and I owe a great debt to you here, is the White House Communications Agency. And there was this crazy situation that there were tapes from Air Force One that were in the LBJ library, and so they wanted to get, and they only asked for, which is infuriating to me, they only asked for tapes after the event, after the assassination itself. What I think would be absolutely crucial is to have gotten, if they still exist, the WHCA communications records, even if they're only logs, but ideally, of course, tapes from the real time leading up to the assassination itself. It seems to me they never asked. They, once again, they accepted the answer that they could not find these tapes, but you were able to provide a few documents, which I'll be talking about.
Okay. But yeah, it's interesting where things like get found. Like you said, the Air Force One tapes were found at the LBJ library. Something else, the transcript of the Dallas doctors on the afternoon of the 22nd describing entrance wounds in the throat, Arlen Specter and company could not locate that, and that showed up years later in the LBJ library in the files, transcript of their press interview. So, yeah. I think the frustration for me with some of these CI files is I think these guys were professionals. And so, you know, as an example, the whole business of telephone taps, a tape from the telephone tap operation being listened to post-assassination, that all comes from FBI files. There's not a trace of it that I've ever seen in CIA files. And so I think they have a better act about hiding some of these things than some of the other agencies.
Well, as most people probably know, that I work in the RFK Assassination Archives, and just recently, somebody, I think somebody, whether the BBC or somebody, asked me to look up, no, actually it was the San Gabriel Gazette, I think it was from there actually, to look up any information, because they interviewed a doctor who was on the scene in the Ambassador Hotel kitchen. They asked me to find any information there was, transcripts, whatever. And the guy gave me his name, right, because he had interviewed him. He just wanted to verify whatever. Do you know, consistently throughout all the indexes, they misspelled this guy's name. Consistently.
Yeah.
And not only that, in our collection, if you saw the RFK records, so many names from the indexes were just, and items were just, especially the indexes, were just blacked out. So you want, you know?
The misspelling is a technique. I mean, most people, or many people may be aware, Peter certainly is, that the Oswald 201 file, when it was finally opened in 1960, misspelled both him and his wife's name.
And with the case a few weeks ago, it was consistently, they misspelled the name the same way, consistently throughout all the indexes. So that's interesting.
Could I have one more question?
Oh, sure.
Lamar Waldron's book
Right.
talks quite a bit about QJ Wynn. Does he have all the current information on that asset?
I'm not the right person to ask, sorry to say.
Yeah, I'd just like to give you the opportunity to say it. I mean, my impression is that going through all of this stuff is like going to a stable and looking through the pile of manure to see what the horse ate. And that, you know, that it's a mountain of crap, and every once in a while something important accidentally gets through, but it's, you know, that little piece of grain there was supposed to have been digested, and it only got through by accident, and it got through covered in just a ton of meaningless, worthless
Yeah, I mean, my overall impression of the CIA collection is sort of two things. One is that for just some basic history of that period, particularly the anti-Castro operations. There's just a rich set of material that isn't assassination related per se that's there, that's useful for people studying that period. As far as stuff that gets closer into the assassination itself, then yeah, I have to treat it very warily. You know, I'm a collector. Peter Scott's Deep Politics 2 about Mexico City is, you know, which is one of my favorite topics, is my Bible on that. But I've started to collect these little things here and there that have come up in the records since, where particularly early reports or things before the story got settled out for the HSA in the mid-70s just continually have items which don't match the official record, and in some ways they match each other. And it's hard to go, you know, all the way to the mat to tell a coherent story from that. But certainly it makes the official record, including even the pre-assassination cables, for instance, suspect. And so, yeah, maybe Peter wants to comment on this phenomenon.
I'm a little uncomfortable with the thrust of that, because if it's true, then I've sort of wasted a lot of my life. I think you summarized it very well just now, but there are documents in the periphery of the assassination which didn't get the careful screen treatment. And there was one I was tempted to mention earlier, and I'm going to mention it now. I'm quite certain that in the segregated collection, I read all the documents I could get on the defectors, the whole family of defectors who defected at the same time as Oswald, roughly, and came back, roughly. And my memory is that in the Webster file, there was a record of, I can't remember, it was 3, 4, 5, or maybe even 6 days of debriefing of Webster.
I remember it as more like 3 or 4, but yeah, you could be right on that.
No,
yeah.
but I mean, this is extremely important.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, how could they, the only explanation for debriefing Webster and not giving a similar debriefing of Oswald is that they didn't need to debrief Oswald because of their special relationship.
I had one more question, and let me clean it up a little bit. I don't mean to suggest that everything that you've been studying are false documents. What I mean to say is that the hardcore stuff is not ever going to be in there. I mean, right, the centerpiece of Plausible Denial, Mark Lane's book, is a memo written by, I think, Angleton to Helms, or was it Helms to Angleton? That memo is not going to turn up. It's not going to be released, although...
If it ever existed.
Oh, well... if it ever existed, right? And you're either persuaded by the evidence...
Still drying.
You're either persuaded by the evidence in Lane's book or you're not, and I'm persuaded by the evidence in Lane's book, although not Marchetti and Spotlight, but the New Jersey magazine, the name of the reporter whose name I don't have on the tip of my tongue. Anyway, another... But I mean, that's something that I'd like to see, and of course is never going to show up. And many other really important documents that probably existed at one point are never going to show up, I think. And I mean, that's the inference, not that everything that you guys are studying is lies and worthless, but that you, and you know, if you want to know what a horse ate, you look at the pile of crap and you can tell what he ate. It takes an awful lot of work, and you have to work backwards, right? You have to say, well, after it's been digested, if what we get is this, what does that mean it started out as? So, you know, it's really a terrible labor, because they don't give you...
It's tough. I mean, I will say that I don't think that there's a staff of 500 people typing all these things up and, you know, taking the real things out and putting them in.
Yeah, I didn't mean
but
to
when things hit very sensitive points, of which Mexico City is a good example, then there are areas in that where you start to question, or I do anyway.
Right. The other thing that I wanted to ask about is that there was a meeting, and I don't remember where I read about it, between, it's one of the Cubans talks about a meeting with presumably David Atlee Phillips, but called Maurice Bishop, and that Oswald was present at it. And I see that as being a very critical piece of information. Has anything come out in reference to that meeting?
Not in these files. I know I think it may be new in the paperback edition of Lamar Waldron's book. He's interviewed Veciana, and so it's in his book, but I think I can summarize. I heard it from him directly, actually. I mean, read it in the book, that according to Waldron, Veciana told him that they were actually that the story he told at the House Committee was a half-truth, and that it wasn't just a chance meeting with Phillips, sort of letting these two guys see each other, but they actually were to meet together to discuss getting Oswald into Castro as part of an attempt to kill Castro. So read his book for what it's worth. I just throw that out.
I will say that using archives is always looking for needles in haystacks.
Right.
And when you do government archives, the haystack is much bigger. And if archivists
And the
knew,
needle's smaller.
yeah, the needle is smaller. But if archivists knew what you wanted, they would have put it in a notebook for you before you got there.
But I'm
it's just-
suggesting that the
it's just
haystack has been
tedious work.
sifted already, and so the needles are more scarce than they
You don't
were.
always know where the needle is, but it may be there. It's just
Oh, sure.
very hard to find.
With this,
The haystack is so big, they can't sift the
Yeah.
whole
with
Well,
this,
They make mistakes.
with this level of documents, by the way, I am a big fan for all the archivists out here of getting this stuff online and searchable. And that's where my focus is.
Rex, is it you or was it you, Peter? We're talking about Webster.
Yeah.
Webster's files are voluminous in the CIA.
Mhm.
Have you seen those files at all?
I don't think I've seen all of them. I've seen certainly seen some.
I saw that
Yes, yes, yeah.
Interestingly, the first person on Webster's case is Robert T. Crowley.
Oh, I didn't
The
catch that.
very, very first generation of a document to do with Webster's defection is Crowley,
Huh.
which is I find fascinating because he headed up the operational support branch of 00 Contact Division up in Washington, 1717 H Street, and his ideas seem to be really to focus down on defectors, and I would have thought he would have been involved with Oswald for certainty. You know, with a terrific degree. So I can't understand why. There's no question that Oswald must have been debriefed, in my mind, and that his stuff was deep sixed, as you said, gone.
I know that there people made a story, I'm not sure I can remember the details right, but in the mid-'70s, during the House Committee's tenure, I think, some CIA officer came forth with the story that he had seen a report from an agent who's been in Minsk.
Donald Dennisley.
Okay, well, you know the story. So.
That's correct.
This is something I looked at years ago, and I've forgotten 90% of it. But if you study the passports, Marina was on the train that went from Moscow to Berlin and on to the Netherlands, Amsterdam. Oswald apparently was not. You know, in his little address book is a map. I think he was possibly debriefed in Europe. I think not in the same way as Webster, because I think he was more important than Webster, and they didn't need the same kind of information for him. Also, the Maasdam sailed from Rotterdam, I believe, and arrived in New York, but it made a stop in Ireland. So it would have been quite possible for Oswald to have got on the ship in Ireland. This is worth looking into.
Yeah, the business about Holland, I'm not sure if I remember right, it's a little bit confused, because I think it's an M. Oswald listed as a male who's on the train,
Right.
but it's...
And the safe house, you know, unmistakably, Marina talks about 3 days in a safe house. Well, she doesn't say safe house, but it's not a hotel. I think it's Amsterdam,
Really?
I believe. And you can't,
Well,
you
that
know,
would-
for
that
a
would
woman
make
who's
sense.
never been out of Russia before, neither of them, in theory, having any contacts whatsoever with the Netherlands, it's a giveaway.
Okay. Okay. Did we need the computer next?
I don't think you, Pat, you didn't have anything to put on the computer, did you? Okay.
Whenever I see that.
So, someone was asking about the agencies and their level of cooperation with the review board, and the review board in the final report has a section about what agencies complied and to what extent, and didn't, and the least forthcoming were NSA and DIA, especially. I talked to the FOIA head of the DIA at a public meeting during the thing, and he said, "Oh, we don't have anything on Oswald or Kennedy assassination over here at DIA." You know, and they just basically dragged their feet till the review board went out of existence. But there are things still being released, and the Nazi War Criminal Records Act has now outstripped the JFK Act in terms of files released. They're up to 8.5 million pages of the Nazi war crimes. And I just saw a panel at the Holocaust Museum of the scholars that are coming up into that, and their discussions about the releases and things like that was, it really mirrored our old discussions here at COPA about the review board. And so we're hoping that that model continues.
I'd like just to comment on the DIA comment. They weren't just asked for records on Oswald, they were asked for everything to do with Cuba, and they had an enormous amount of relevant material on Cuba. And Joseph Carroll, the head of DIA, is one of the lead personalities in the Waldron book. I'm not going to pass a verdict yet on the Waldron book, but let me just say on that, the paperback is so much better than the hardcover that if anyone thinks they Waldron is not worth taking serious because of the hardcover, and I was one of those people. The new material about Guevara and Almeida, and there's a lot of rewritten chapters in there that make it, in my view, a totally different book and a much more credible book that has to be taken seriously, even though there are many places where I would disagree with his evaluations. So.
Well, thanks. And also, in terms of your point, while it's true that many things get hidden, it's also true that many of these documents are generated cross-agency. So one agency trying to cover for itself, often the other agency is hanging on to it. And it gets out that way. And then I remember instances when they started to finally release the JFK stuff of previously redacted documents and then a currently redacted document, and you could put the two side by side and read the whole document because their rationale for the redactions had differed so much over the 20 or 30 year gap. So, but I think records are snapshots. They're not the film. And you're probably not ever going to find the record as like, send this guy to Dallas to kill Kennedy. I mean, you know, that's not written down there, you know. But
well, it may have been, but we're not going to get it.
Yeah, they just don't write it down. No, they don't write it down. No.
I'm always shocked at some of the things that do get written down.
Well, no, I think, you know, it's not quite, it's more subtle than that, you know, and what you'd read wouldn't be that. Plus, if for no other reason that the guy at the, you know, from the top to the bottom of that chain, you get further and further into need to know. And, you know, the ones on the bottom need to know less and less.
I would say this example of that, just study the Church Committee's analysis of the Castro plot. Record on that is mostly just there, you know, with a great congressional backing, subpoenaing people, you know, getting depositions, testifying. It's not, there's not a whole lot of the written record, you know, underneath that.
Yeah.
Some.
Well, I mean, we had a whole secret war in Laos for 10 years. No one knew about or reported on or, you know, anything else. So.
Yeah, because another relevant thing here, I think it's very symptomatic, that Casey, there's no question, Casey, in the early stages of the war in Afghanistan, was running it through BCCI, the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, and the Kerry and Brown subpoenaed all the CIA records. And there were no CIA records, and so it was the answer, and Kerry and Brown believed it because they believed that Casey did everything off the record and in most cases meeting personally with Abedi, the head of BCCI, with no one there to take a record. So I think you have to imagine that that's how very sensitive things are done.
Yeah. No, I think not only is our history, you know, not recorded at times, but then what is recorded is often buried from us. And the National Security Archives in D.C. did a Freedom of Information Act request on every single document that's mentioned in the footnotes of the 9/11 Commission report under FOIA, and not a single document to date have they agreed to release. They're going to court on some of them because the reasons given weren't even legal. But, you know, it's a game. And then on top of that, you have a declassification engine that's running at top speed and over 15 million records a year that are being classified. And on top of that, Bush is sending people through the National Archives reclassifying previously declassified documents. And so, you know, trying to even catch up with that, I mean, I say 8.5 million pages from Nazi or 6.5 million JFK release, those are pages. I'm talking about 50 million records. And John Dean recently in a lecture said that if the Clinton order to at least review everything that was 25 years or older toward release had been implemented, it was delayed and then basically reversed by Bush. Had that been implemented, he said 1 billion records would have been released. So that's probably minimum 10 billion pages, but 1 billion records would have been released just under that review. So there's so much of it buried, but I've never felt it was fruitless to try to get at the records, even if they don't show everything, they show something. And you know, there's other ways that you know things or find out things, you know, from the historical testimony or courts or that kind of stuff. So I think there's many approaches to get at reality, but I wanted to give Pat Sikora a chance to talk. She's with the Robert Kennedy Archive. Did you have something pressing, John? And she worked with Phil Melanson, and I asked her to say a few words about the archives here. And I noticed a few faces here that weren't here last night, and so if you hadn't registered, it's $20 for today or $35 for today and tomorrow. And you can just either get in touch with me or Mike Nurko over here when he wakes up. And I don't mind him. I was sleeping too. Yeah, we were having a wild video night here, staying up talking about 9/11 till 3 in the morning. Yes, that's right. No, you kept me up all night. But anyway, if you can just make those arrangements. So, Pat, if you want to come up, and I think she had some material. I don't know if she put it out today, but.
And I'm going to go check and see if Chris Pike's fax are.
Oh, okay, thanks. No, you'll use this mic. That's for the question.
Thank you.
Just use this as a lapel mic.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, I'm just going to keep it short and sweet. I know people getting antsy. Well, as a transition, we think of the Nixon tapes that just were deleted, you know, inadvertently, I guess, right? At any rate,
Another Rosemary Wood.
yeah. At any rate, everybody has a copy of this RFK thing. If you don't, I can give you one. And then the write-up on Phil Melanson. I don't know. I think, does everyone have one?
Does anyone need one?
Oh, okay. Well, you can pass them around then. People can grab it if they need it. And then the article on Phil Melanson also.
I'm going to pass it back.
Yeah, and if then at the end, I can pick them up at the end or whatever. Well, I guess I made some comments here and there about the RFK assassination records. Well, the flyer gives you some information, but I can fill you in. Like I say, the indexes have a lot of names blocked out. There's things in the text that's blocked out. And in fact, Larry Teeter never had a chance. He would have been there for hours if he had a chance to go to the archives. But I'm trying to explain to him that there were names that were blocked out. You know, alphabetical by surnames, and it seems in the same area the names were blocked out. So you wonder, you know, what they were hiding. And we do have audio cassettes. We have transcripts. The audio cassettes, as Rex can probably tell you, because you were in our archives, what, about a week, no, less than a week ago. There's so much background noise, and I notice, you know.
Not bad overall compared to a lot.
But you have to really listen closely, and there was nothing our technical people could do with that. So we have the transcripts. We also have private investigator files.
The tapes of interviews?
Tapes of interviews, yes.
Maybe from LAPD.
And we have private investigator files and different material on that. We have the transcripts of the court proceedings. I don't know what else to say, but we have a pretty pardon me?
Chirac, Turner.
We have, Chirac. I'll tell you an interesting thing that I discovered about Chirac. About just, I think, 2 days before I came here. And that's why Chirac, we have this kind of nebulous view of some of the things he does. Because there was a videotape we had called, I believe, who shot RFK or something. That one videotape, because somebody called and I went back to review the tapes from BBC. And one tape was by MPI Productions, copyrighted. So I started reviewing the two tapes because they wanted copyright information, something to do with the Ambassador Hotel. The other tape, which they call A Second Gun, which Ted Chirac claims he has copyright of, but he just had a regular label that anybody could type out and slap on the tape. Both tapes began with the exact same material. And then I talked to Judy Farrar, who is actually in charge of the whole entire archives, and she said, "Oh, I'm aware of that. He claims he worked on it, and he claims certain information is his, and but you know, and it really kind of you know, how can both people have copyright to the same information?" And of course, I figured the actual company probably had more credibility.
Copyright is not on individual sections within the film. It's on the film in total.
Right.
In other words, you can extract parts of it that he has no control.
But you have to give people credit for. You have to obviously give credit for. I've had when I was going for my master's degree, I had an article published in a professional. My professor encouraged me to have it published, and it was published in the UConn professional, University of Connecticut professional magazine, professional publication, and I use material. Quoted material or used material from other people's writings, and I had to contact them and get legal permission actually to publish my article with their stuff, you know, referring or quoting them.
But there's material, there's sections of film that he didn't own, he just put into his film.
Oh yeah, and he claimed copyright to the whole thing.
In total, but you took that particular segment that said that he got there's no copyright on that. Well, if it is, it certainly isn't Ted Chirac's.
He may have gotten permission to use it, in which case he could copyright his film with it in it.
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, but in his case, he didn't get permission from anybody to anything.
But there's also something called fair use, and I don't know how that would work with film. But in text, there are limits. You can quote up, I think, to 500 words, particularly if you're using it as part of an argument rather than just saying that read this, it's interesting. Then fair use allows you up to a certain limit, and I think it's 500 words in text. I have no idea what it would be in film.
I think for video, I mean, it's evolving actually, and it's evolving in an unfavorable direction, but there certainly is the notion in the law of fair use for video as well. Using a piece like this in a documentary and not commenting on it, I think, you know, is at best a gray area probably.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? I guess that, you know, like I say, I work with a collection all the time, so, you know, ever since I started working in the archives, I used to be in audiovisual for over 20 years. I pretty much field all the questions, and all the questions come to me, so.
I have a question, which is, you know, like you said, I was at the archives recently. I'm giving a talk at the other place on RFK on Sunday. And I thought, you know, it's a great collection. There's a lot of textual material. There's a lot of audio material, photographs. I'm curious if there's any thought or plans to turn part of this or all of it into an electronic archive.
I'm sorry?
Into an electronic archive? Put it on.
Well, they're gradually working on that, digitizing. They're gradually working on that, but it's going to take a while, obviously, because we don't have that much in terms of staff to work with that. And another problem we have, well, staff is the major problem, and but also because we use student staff. There's Judy and I are the only full-time people, and then we have students, and of course there's that turnover with students, and also right now well, you know how crowded our room is. You were there. I mean, it's like, and we have stuff stored in the basement that we figure we rarely use, but we're trying to get funding actually to get an area that's more. Oh, you know how that was. You know how that place is. It's like it's got to step over things and step around things just to get anywhere, and That's what we're really focusing on right now, to get funding for. And Judy Farrar is trying to get funding now from the federal government, and Barney Frank, he wrote a letter in our behalf to get funding so we can move into an area that's, number one, more climate controlled. As you know, that room was very hot. I mean, it's either cold or hot. We need good climate control. So we're working on funding right now. That's what Judy Farrar's main concentration is, so we can get this stuff in a better area than it is right now. I don't know if there's any other questions or at this point. Yeah, it's short and sweet, but I figured. Thank you very much.
And as I've said, my hope, and I'm glad that Cynthia McKinney is also very interested in putting her name to this effort, is to create a museum, and would also have archived materials and a research center in D.C. on the political assassinations, but also on the broader hidden history of the United States. And that I think it could become a center where we could show new documentary films, we could highlight authors with new books. It's a press center, so we could get press attention for things, hopefully, you know, as they're coming out, or if new sets of records are released that are of some significance, we could do presentations on them, and have a research center there where both scholars and students or young people that are interested. But we get 6 million tourists a year in D.C., and you know, the buses take them over to the Ford Theater, so I think the teachers would just as well take them to see something more recent, you know, and we could probably get the best evidence and put it out, you know, and do a good job with it. So, but it's a real money, you know, situation. I mean, we penciled out just even starting it at any serious level would be like $4 million. So, you know, it's not cheap, and we don't want to do it on the cheap, but. There is a provision that the Spy Museum used in D.C. They got $6 million of federal money through D.C. to put a museum there, because I guess it's a special area where they encourage museums, so it's possible. Not this one, right. But, I mean, if it's sometimes their rules work against them, so, you know. But anyway, it's one of my current hopes. And we saw something online where Bill Cosby had put his name to a museum on African American slavery, and his approach was to ask 1 million people to give $8 to raise $8 million. So I thought perhaps with Cynthia's name on something like that, she's got a lot of appeal of her asking people to give a set amount, you know, and just start it with individual contributions. But I think there's also, and there is, since everything in the world almost has an association, there's an association of American museums in D.C. that have a staff that help you create a museum, and have all these materials about it and guides and that sort of thing. So I think, you know, we could kind of hit the ground running with a little bit of juice of early information. And somebody also was saying, I think it was Ralph saying, I could have a website up. Well, I did have a long effort in the last about year and a half to try to get a website up, had a website designed. It had some marketing things that I disagreed with, and when I hit that point, I couldn't get a resolve with the people. So now it's to the point where they're wanting to sort of give the website back to me at cost, and then I'm going to have to sort of farm around for another team to help me with, you know, because I'm only user-end skills, and that's part of the reason COPA never had a website. And when I used to ask COPA people who were more skilled to help me build a website, they would send me templates promoting their own theories, which isn't useful to COPA. So, you know, it would be nice to have a website up, but I thought at least if I can get mine up, I can put announcements of COPA on it. And there are online forums that probably some of you are part of, JFK Research Forums and other online forums that are going on. So, you know, there's access, but it's our history, and especially the people who have been digging up the hidden history have very interesting archives. And the Assassination Archive and Research Center in D.C. has been a locale for that, but you know, I know they have space limitations, and they've had to put a lot of stuff in storage. I think it's over in Virginia, and
well, there's about half and half. There's still an active facility there, but I mean, frankly, the amount of foot traffic to the place is much, much, much lower than it used to be, and
Yeah.
that's part of the push to get stuff online. Oh, I'm sorry, it was right here. I was just commenting that, yeah, the ARC, I mean, it still has on K Street an office. You know, some of the stuff is in the basement, some's in Jim's office. He still welcomes people to come there and do research, and a lot of materials available, but much of the, you know, half or more of it is in storage at this point. And, you know, I'm working with him in this electronic project because that seems like the destiny of that material.
Well,
Of Jim Lazar's, probably about 10% at this point. There's much to come. We're, like, this CIA collection is a big part of it, probably, you know, 20% of his entire collection, and we're halfway through that. There's an equally sized FBI collection that we'll be doing as well. But then there's also all kinds of subject files, private researcher files and stuff, and there's no specific plans for each and every file he has, but it's certainly on our radar screen.
Well, I think you're right that digitization is really, for the future, the way to go with these things because it makes it more accessible to larger numbers of people, you know. And but I think having a physical, you know, archive as well and a place to come and do research is, and I'm hoping, you know, that we can find an amenable way to sort of combine ARC with this museum plant, you know, and give space to a number of collections.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that the money problem is obviously a huge one, but I think the idea of a museum in D.C. is fantastic, strictly on the level of the furor it would cause and the foot traffic from people all over the world who would get to see the material.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's the larger reason, obviously. But the publicity probably wouldn't be bad either in trying to build a museum.
That's right, yeah.
I think it's like conceptual art. I mean, the story of getting this museum off the ground will be perhaps more revealing than the museum itself if you ever get it.
Well, some of it's being written right here, so. Yes, no, no question about that. It'll be an adventure. You know, to even think that there is such a thing as an alternative history to America is probably verboten at this point. But you know, many people who live here know there is one, and many people who live abroad know there's an even deeper one that we're not privy to. That's why we don't know. And they say, why would anyone hate us? Well, because they don't know what we do in their name. You know. So we're going to have a lunch break, and then going to reconvene here around 2 o'clock. And John Hankey's here going to talk, and you know, we'll have some up-to-date research on other political assassination and materials. But thanks to everybody that's come.
And Peter.
And Peter, yes.
Yes.
Peter going to talk.
just
I didn't mean to
announce now
exclude
that
you.
the actual title of my talk will be JFK and 9/11 and why it is useful to study the two together.
Oh, all right.
What I missed,
I thought it was going to be everything you wanted to ask, but we're afraid to know.
Did you just make that up?
Yeah.
That's very good.